Hello everybody, it's the Outgo Diesel Guy with another review for you. In this case it's yet again a Bachmann train set. It's the Chessie Special specifically. I got this train set a couple of months back now, in fact quite a few months back, this past November I want to say, in a local, if you want to call it that in my area, Hobby Lobby. I guess by the amount of equipment as we see included with this set and the track layout, we can call this sort of a mid-range entry-level set if you will. Taking a look at the set, it's propelled by a steam engine and has the usual fare of Bachmann cars. Again, these are not Silver Series cars, but they are essentially convertible to a Silver Series. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we have the usual Bachmann propaganda, if you will, on the back here, demonstrating what layouts you can create with this wonderful set, if of course you add tracks to it. They even specify what specific easy tracks you can, of course, conveniently order from your local Bachmann retailer to make these layouts come to life. My favorite, as always, is the one in the center there, the double kidney layout. I must say, I have to get around to building this layout one of these days. I'm sure I have enough easy track by now to make it come to life. And as the camera pans, we get a shot of the actual inventory in this train set. I'll go over it with you in detail. We have a USRA type steam locomotive, 060 type steam locomotive with an operating headlight and tender. Again, no smoke on board. We get a stock car, a 3-dome tank car, a gondola, an off-center caboose, a 47 by 38 oval of snap fit easy track, which actually includes shockable shockers, a single piece of straight track, and a single power rear railer, straight sections again, and of course a power pack with the speed controller and the illustrated instruction manual. So essentially not a stunningly, shockingly exciting layout. It is, however, a huge improvement, at least in my opinion, over the standard ring of track with no straight sections included in the rather expensive Coastliner train set. I'll get more into that later on when I talk about price. I paid about $150 for this particular train set. I'll cover the pricing of this set in more detail later on in the program. And my usual important safety note, again, because this is an electric train set, it is not designed for children. It is meant for people 14 years and older. So please keep that in mind if you're buying this for a younger person. It is not designed for someone under the age of 14 to operate. And without further ado, let's get right into it and take the plastic off and get this box open. I must say, I'm not sure how long this set sat in that shop. Again, this set is still being made as of this point by Bachmann, and it felt pretty fresh opening the cellophane off. And once the cellophane is off, we can get a better look at the equipment included. And without further ado, let's unbox this set. Again, it's pretty simple. Simply pull the cardboard tab to release the cardboard flap, revealing the two-box arrangement which Bachmann usually uses. The white box you see there, or white plastic packaging, is for the rolling stock itself, and the cardboard box on the right there is, in fact, where all the tracks, power pack, etc. lie, as well as the instructions. Let's start by pulling out the actual tracks and accessories. Again, this is a small loop with just two straight sections, although not the smallest thing Bachmann sells. It is certainly not the biggest. Inside the box, we find the obligatory instruction manual, as well as additional propaganda material, if you will, from Bachmann, as well as the special red 2-track wire that we'll need to connect to the speed control to get the power from the speed controller to the actual track itself. Now, before we talk in detail about the quote-unquote massive layout, as we can see by the box that is included with this particular train set, let's take a look at the actual rolling stock we get with it. The equipment was well packaged in this plastic packaging that Bachmann always puts the equipment in when you buy a train set from them. As you can see, there's our steam locomotive that I described before, the 060 steamer with its tender. And then we have the multi-dome tank car right over here on the right. Next we have, of course, the almost obligatory caboose, red caboose. We have a gondola car and, of course, a stock car, as I mentioned before. Okay, I won't stall any long. Let's get into the nitty-gritty and pull out the actual rolling stock. We'll begin, as usual, with the 060 steam locomotive and its tender. These were locked very tightly into the plastic packaging, so no damage was actually incurred during transportation. I would, however, recommend extreme caution when removing the locomotive from the packaging, as the way it was locked in against one of the plastic domes can cause damage to the locomotive itself. Here's a close-up shot of it. As you can see, most of the details are plastic. They're added on separately, but admittedly don't look all that sharp. Again, this is built down to a price, typical Bachmann equipment. Nonetheless, the detailing is still there and is a nice little touch, including the safety valve, the whistle, and the multi-dome setup on the top. The base is not very well detailed. While Bachmann did in fact add detailing to the firebox/cab area of the locomotive, we'll see that it really wasn't very well detailed in general. All the little parts are basically molded into the plastic, and they really don't stick out as being three-dimensional or as being realistic at all. Again, detailing done, but down to a very low price, and it shows. I do appreciate things like the water pump, as we notice on the side of the locomotive, as we see coming into range here, and other things like that being done. However, because they're simply molded into the plastic, they really don't pop. As a result, they do this locomotive no aesthetic favors whatsoever. We also note the steam generator on the top of the locomotive next to the whistle right over there on the left. That again is designed to utilize steam power to generate electricity for cab accessories, such as the light as well as a windshield wiper. Now let's move on to the coal tender of this particular locomotive, and, well, to paraphrase a comedy TV car salesman, it's got one. The coal load doesn't look particularly realistic. The light in the back is in place, but it doesn't do anything, as again, this particular tender just has plastic wheels, meaning that in addition to not providing extra power for the actual locomotive itself to avoid stalling on weak points of track, it cannot light the actual light itself. The trucks are standard Bachmann affair, plastic wheels, plastic truck covers, etc., held in place with a single screw. Nothing really fancy here. And again, the coupler, while it is a knuckle, is once again a Mark I with a plastic ABS type spring. One of the things I cannot get past. I know a lot of people criticize me for criticizing Bachmann on this, but I'll tell you something. While these will work for a while, they will fail eventually, and you will have to replace them with a knuckle-sprung one, unless you want to constantly go through replacing these couplers over and over again, which they will most certainly do, as the plastic does not maintain its tautness. Moving along, let's take a closer look at the dome tank car, the triple dome tank car. This is again one of Bachmann's standard line of cars and feels particularly light for what it is. The detailing also is not at the same level in my opinion as of the rest of the set, which is really a shame considering the price this set sells for. Again, we have the usual array, yada yada yada, plastic wheels, plastic trucks, and plastic sprung couplers. Nothing fancy here. The frame, again, doesn't have any real weight to it, and there are some nice details added, but they're, again, not necessarily all separately applied, and if they are, they don't really have all this convincing manner to them. This is, again, just a cheap car to be put in a set and not much else. While it won't exactly thrill a connoisseur of model railroad collecting, it will do the job of simply providing something for the locomotive to pull around the track. That said, I wouldn't trust this thing in my yard switching tracks, although I may be tempted to put metal wheels on this just to see what this car is exactly capable of and whether the metal wheels make that much of a difference in terms of its ability to stay on the tracks. Something I've still been struggling to figure out directly on these Bachmann cars and their ability to hold the rails when in Silver Series trim. Here's a good close-up shot of the rather infamous ABS plastic sprung coupler. Again, something I would strongly recommend replacing at one point to keep these cars rolling reliably if you do decide to buy this set. Next, let's move on to the stock car. This is an obligatory car that seems to be included in every train set, including from the modern era, even though these types of cars haven't been used to transport livestock in years. There's noticeably more weight than the actual dome car has on it. This appears to be essentially what the Silver Series car is, minus the metal wheels and metal sprung couplers, which again, it is once again equipped with the annoying plastic wheels and plastic sprung couplers. There is less weight than Bachmann's normal 54-foot, I believe this is, box cars. The main reason being is, of course, this is a pretty much open-shelled car. The idea being that the livestock needs room to breathe, so the boards are not airtight. They're designed to let in as much air as possible as the car rolls down the track. Again, it is equipped with the rather infamous plastic knuckle-sprung couplers, which I cannot get past, and the annoying plastic wheels. It also does feature two sliding doors on the front, which open and close very easily. And really, there isn't very much more to be said about this car. Next, let's move on to the gondola car. This car is very familiar to me, as Bachmann has been making them since the 80s. How do I know? Because my first Bachmann train set had one of these. I do believe this is a little out of scale. The sidewalls should be taller on this car. But again, Bachmann has yet to get around to changing that. Again, it's equipped with plastic wheels and plastic knuckle couplers with plastic springs. Again, about the only upgrade done to this car, much like most of the old Bachmann rolling stock included in modern Bachmann train sets, is that the knuckles have been directly applied to the actual body itself. Now that said, this is pretty easy to convert to a Silver Series car. I've done that a couple times with great success. It's just too bad that Bachmann chooses again and again to cheapen these so when they're sold in a train set, so a beginner can run into the usual annoying issues with the cars derailing when pushed too hard. Here's a quick little close-up of the actual plastic sprung knuckle coupler, and again of the truck itself. I will give Bachmann some credit here, as the car does appear to have more weight to it than what I was expecting, but that's really all there is to be said about this particular piece of rolling stock. And finally, last but not least, what train set is complete without a little red caboose to haul behind the set itself? This particular red caboose should look familiar to those of you who have had Bachmann sets from back in the day and even more recent times, as again Bachmann hasn't changed it much at all, except to upgrade it to having the knuckles couplers, and again having those couplers body mounted instead of truck mounted. But again, there are plastic wheels, plastic sprung knuckle couplers, yada yada yada. No real change in terms of the actual detailing. Same exact tooling being used to produce this since the 70s and 80s. The sides are again completely devoid of any detailing. In fact, as we see here, there is no actual glass in the windows. They're just open frames. It really shows how dated this thing and crude this particular car is, I should say. Basically, the most exciting thing about it is it has a chimney coming out of the top by the cupola caboose, which again lacks all windows, just open framed holes in the plastic, if you will, to represent them. And that's the equipment included with the set. Now let's get down to getting it actually together and see how it performs. To do that, we have to, of course, get the tracks out. We'll start by opening the cardboard flap that secures the track box shut to reveal the actual speed controller on one side. We'll then go around to the actual top and start releasing the plastic ties that hold the tracks in place. Taking a close look at the tracks, we see that there isn't anything much to see here. It's the standard, rather inexpensive steel alloy track that Bachmann sticks in all of its cheap train sets. The only exception being the Silver Series sets, which get the nickel silver track. It's 18 inches. For the uninitiated model railroader, that basically translates into a very tight turn that only some equipment can make, although a lot of model railroad manufacturers try to make this equipment, but it generally tends to be less expensive items. A track, as we see, got shipped in two bundles. The second, unusually enough, combines the straight sections and the curves together. The top track here is the one we're interested in. This is a power terminal straight track, not a curve terminal for a change. Again, because there are two straight sections. A set's track layout, as included, is an actual oval layout, not a standard ring layout. Although, despite the fact that this has this amazing inclusion of two straight sections, one being the terminal track, I still can't help feeling like Oliver Twist at dinner time begging for seconds. And next we have the obligatory off-the-shelf speed controller that Bachmann includes with these sets. Again, this is the more modern one, if you want to call it that. It doesn't have the safety lock-off mode. I guess the reason for this being removed is that these sets are now exclusively marketed toward adults. That said, it does its job, allowing you to control the train, just don't expect miracles from it. It is also quite easy to install, which I'll show later on. Again, there's a knob in the center for speed control, as well as a direction control on the top. Another interesting note on the speed controller, it also lacks a place to hook up accessories, which is something obligatory from all train sets going all the way back to the 80s. It's not clear why Bachmann removed the accessory hookup from its most recent version of the speed controller it includes with its train sets. Whether this was a safety issue or a cost-cutting issue, whatever the case, this was done. Next, let's unbox the actual wall transformer / power pack we will need to actually power the speed controller. It's located in its own separate cubby of the cardboard box that contains the tracks and accessories. Nothing much to be said about this. It is necessary, so please don't lose it, as you will need to install it later on to actually power up the power pack itself. It is, however, much like everything else here, very simple to install. And with the actual unboxing of all the tracks and accessories complete, let's start assembling our layout. The Bachmann Easy Track system, as defined by its actual name, is, well, very easy to assemble, although some parts don't go together as smoothly as they should due to some apparent manufacturing glitches in how the rails were put together on the actual factory floor before being placed in the actual box. As we can see there, I'm having a hard time getting this piece to snap together, but a little tweaking and a little messing around gets it to go. Again, assembly is generally easy as long as you don't run into any of the flawed sections like I mentioned before. Line the two pieces of the track up and gently press them together. Then run your finger across the joint to make sure you don't have a bump. If you do find you do in fact have a bump where the tracks join, pull the tracks apart and reconnect them so that you don't. A bump like this on the joining section can not only lead to power problems, but can cause the train to go flying when it hits this section of track. And so it is in one's best interest that these joints are made as smooth as possible. In an effort to avoid putting you to sleep, I will speed this section up. A good estimate for a new model railroad to assemble this small and basic layout would be somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes. Myself being in the hobby since I was very young, I can basically get one of these out very easily in like 5 to 10 minutes. With the tracks fully assembled into a layout, it's now time to get access to the actual 2-track wire. And to do this, we're going to pull it out of the plastic it came in, which also happens to be the paperwork for the train set. Included somewhat shamelessly in the cellophane packing where the actual 2-track wire is located, so you'll have no choice but to read it, is of course some brochure on where to acquire more tracks from Bachmann. We also get a locomotive disassembly diagram and maintenance instructions to keep the engine going, which we'll go into more detail of later on. The assembly instructions are also included here, which are kind of moot at this point since we've pretty much completed everything except connecting the power pack itself. And without further ado, let's use the easy plug, as it's called, to connect our tracks up to our speed controller. Calling this goof-proof is a huge understatement, as there's only one way the cable will actually plug into anything. First, we remove the plastic tie that holds the assembly together. Next, we'll insert the end of the wire with the flat plug on it into the derailleur itself. Carefully line the two contacts up and press it in place. This may take a little strength to accomplish. Please be careful not to break or bend or force anything, as this can cause you a headache later on. Once we're sure that the plug is successfully and correctly attached to the actual derailleur itself, we can then connect it directly to the speed controller. This is again about as goof-proof as it gets. We take the rounded end of the plug and plug it where it says 2-track on the back of the speed controller. This plugs in much like an audio adapter for a headset. Once the plug is thoroughly in place, we can then connect the actual transformer up to the speed controller itself. This is again as goof-proof as it gets. We simply use the other connection that's on the opposite side of the speed controller to hook up the actual plug. Again, you can't insert the other rounded plug into this socket because of the fact that it is a completely different socket altogether. Now, before we plug our wall transformer into an actual wall outlet, it's a good idea to re-rail the train. This will help avoid any unwanted accidents caused by the transformer actually being left on in the on position. To do so is really quite simple. We'll start with the caboose. We simply place it roughly on the derailleur and pull it back and forth gently, applying gentle pressure. Once it rolls backwards and forwards without any resistance, we know we've got it on the track. We'll repeat this procedure with the rest of the rolling stock. Again, place them roughly on the derailleur, pull them back and forth until you feel the wheels click into place on the rails, and or you feel the actual car in question rolling smoothly back and forth on the tracks without any resistance from the ties on the rails themselves. Next, we need to couple all of the rolling stock together. This is really quite simple. Make sure you're preferably on a straight section of track. Gently make sure the couplers are lined up and push the two cars in question together. Pull them back and forth to ensure there's a good join made. Repeat this procedure with the rest of the rolling stock so that all the cars join correctly. Next, it's time to finally re-rail the steam locomotive and its tender. We'll start with the tender first. Again, same procedure, run it back and forth on the re-railer until the wheels click into place and or you feel the car is rolling smoothly back and forth with no resistance from the ties themselves. The same basic procedure goes for the steam locomotive. Please use caution though, because again there are separately applied details that are not particularly strong on this particular model. Once on the track, carefully lift the back of the engine up and then place it on top of the actual hook on the cab end of the tender itself. Pull it back and forth gently once or twice to ensure that everything is on the rails. Next, we'll couple the actual locomotive to the actual cars themselves. Very simple. Again, simply take the train of cars, pull them up to the rear of the tender, and gently push them together, making sure the couplers are straight so they will engage correctly. And with that, we now have the train on the track and ready to roll. Before we connect our wall transformer that is already connected to our power pack to a wall outlet, it's a good idea to make sure the throttle is set to 0. This will stop any unintended acceleration from the locomotive, causing it to derail possibly in the process. Once our power source has been connected, the power pack's light will come on, as we see right there. To make the train move, we gently advance the throttle toward the right. And away we go. Once I got the set running, I quickly discovered that this particular locomotive, at least, was not the greatest runner in the world. The speed you're witnessing and operating right here essentially was as slow as I could get the locomotive to go without basically having it jerk the cars off the tracks. This set definitely leaves quite a bit more than to be desired. Now, some might say I'm being far too hard on Bachmann. After all, it's a quote-unquote toy, as people say. Well, as I've pointed out over and over again, the set is marketed toward adults. As with new regulations, nation's children can't simply be allowed to play with these sorts of things anymore. But even so, why would we want a model railroader of any age, for that matter, to have a miserable experience with their first train set? If anything, we want that to be the best experience possible, because that'll get the person into the hobby. If it squeaks, rattles, and reminds you constantly of how cheaply it's made, it's not going to do anyone any wonders. At higher speeds, the squeaking became more incessant. Admittedly, I'm a model railroader and a little bit more picayune, having been in the hobby for a while, but still, once again, not the greatest feeling knowing that this thing runs like it's been around the track several times when I just pulled it out of the box literally a few seconds ago, and it was very clearly sold as brand new to me. But overall, I guess I can conclude that it does in fact run. Another annoying quirk to this rather overpriced but yet inexpensive train set is that the locomotive's headlight is pretty much impossible to see, in particular at low throttle settings. It's bad enough this engine did not have a smoke generator on it, and you'd expect at least that much for the price this whole set sold for. That said, you'd at least expect the light to be visible at least to a certain extent, let alone the ability to actually light the tracks ahead of it. And again, the squeaking and rattling this locomotive makes at slow speeds really rubs in the fact that it's cheap. Now let's do a slow speed test on the locomotive and see exactly what extent it's able to crawl, if at all. And that's just about as slow as I was able to make it move. And as we can see in this next shot, it required quite a bit of throttle just to make that speed possible. Backing up proved even worse. The locomotive, while it began to run initially smooth, quickly ground to a halt as the side rods reached a certain point in the mechanism's motion. It appears that there's lubrication already necessary in this model and/or things weren't assembled correctly, as the engine frequently stalled out when trying to run backwards at slow speeds. And while I have this locomotive running in reverse, let's go and see how these cars handle a backup move. This is a good test for the usual train cars of these entry-level train sets, as in the past they would simply jump the track and derail when put into reverse in general. And I guess I have to give props to Bachmann here, as these cars have no trouble staying on the track even at higher speeds, despite the cheap plastic wheels and couplers utilized on these particular cars. With the testing phase of this set largely over for this review, let's focus on the locomotive itself. Now, I'm not going to disassemble this locomotive specifically because I don't want to take the chance in not getting it back together and or having it break, as I just have not had good experiences taking apart Bachmann locomotives and getting them back together without any serious issues. As you can see here, there is a break-in and lubrication and maintenance instructions as well, but the part we're after is the exploded parts diagram. And as we can see, this is a typical low-end Bachmann locomotive. It does not have bearings in the actual crankcase section of the engine itself, and it uses a very tiny 3-pole motor that's actually supposed to push this engine along, and or pull it along depending upon which direction you run it in. All of this actually makes perfect sense given the locomotive's poor performance during the testing I did just before. Again, it's a shame that Bachmann seems to think it's okay to put such junky parts into a locomotive, and somehow hope that someone that would buy one of these products would come back to them for the replacement locomotive and or another train set, although admittedly they are kind of the only game in town in some places, although as I understand Walters is pushing their products out a little bit more aggressively as of late, especially since the pandemic has caused people to kind of rediscover sort of indoor hobbies such as trains. I must also note, in my experience, at least with these locomotives, that this locomotive will probably not stand the test of time and fail prematurely, so don't expect to get more than a year or two out of it. At least not without major work, as that 3-pole motor in particular has a bad reputation for having a very short life. Taking a good close look at this locomotive, on something I didn't do earlier, as we can see, most of the parts are basically molded into the plastic. There are some separately applied details, but these specific details tend to be very badly pushed out of plastic molds and really show up badly. Something else I could never quite get my finger on was whether or not we were seeing traction tires on these wheels, or whether we were in fact witnessing really badly done blackening, as there are several runs where the white wall actually meets the blackened wheel, or what appears to be a blackened wheel from what I can tell. It's details like these that really make this locomotive and set in general feel cheap. Looking again at the side profile shot of the locomotive, from a far distance I'm sure this looks pretty acceptable, but as we zoom in again we see the cheapness kind of rearing its ugly head. Again, the plastic isn't very well molded, and it kind of just screams cheap in general of how all this was applied and how all this is assembled. It's a real shame too. Had Bachmann put a little bit more effort, they could have made a real class steam engine out of this entry-level set, and really made something that would have been worth buying and looking at. Unfortunately, corners were cut again. And particularly of criticism worthy is the detailing in the cab itself. The controls to operate the locomotive are molded into the plastic and don't have anything resembling a three-dimensional effect at all. Around the front of the unit, it lacks a cow catcher and instead has this sort of split pilot, which again adds to the cheapness of this engine. Admittedly, this could have been done for the sake of making it easy to replace the coupler, but since that coupler can't be replaced, I'm not sure why they would do it. And now we come to the nitty-gritty, and well, while I paid about $150 for it, as we can see, that is the price that Bachmann would like you to pay. $285. Ouch! Now, if this were a Lionel HO set, one of the new ones in particular that came out, which it most definitely is not, that'd be reasonable. Here, that price is just so far out of whack. Admittedly, yes, you can get this cheaper, but come on, seriously? A loop with 2 whopping straight sections of track, a subpar built steam locomotive? And while you do get 4 decent cars that will stay on the track, including the caboose pretty well, there isn't really anything exciting about them either. The Lionel sets all have metal wheels and metal knuckle sprung couplers. In conclusion, I have to say avoid this thing unless you can get a deal on it, because especially at $285, you're much better off getting one of the new Lionel HO sets, which, in addition to the features I've pointed out that it has that this set doesn't have already, the unit will also come with Bluetooth on board, a Bluetooth controller, as well as DCC and sound from the factory. You really can't go wrong at that price for the Lionel, not this set. Bottom line, avoid this thing unless you get some kind of crazy deal on it, as I can almost guarantee you that that locomotive featured in this particular set will not stand the test of time, and you will wind up shelling out $100 on a new one. Anyway, folks, that's going to do it for this review. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and as always, keep the metal side down.